Welcome back, everyone. Today is a very special day. We get to talk about a phone that I kind of talk about a lot on this channel, surprisingly. And it might seem like a very random phone, like, bro, why are you talking about this phone? Like, there's so many other phones, in the marketplace. Why do you keep coming back to a phone that came out in 2013? And the reason being is because this was the phone that I used for about a year and a half. This was the last Android phone that I used as a main phone, like fully, before I switched over to an iPhone. And I'll be honest, my experience with the LG G2 was a pretty good experience. I really didn't have too many issues, even though a lot of issues have existed for this phone. Boot looping issues, touch screen issues, so many different problems. And I will talk about them in this video. I'm not just going to talk about the positives, but overall, funny enough, I didn't start experiencing those problems until I switched over to an iPhone, and then those problems started arising. So I think maybe there's some insider knowledge. Maybe they knew that I was switching phones or whatever. I'm not really too sure. And then they started messing it up. But one thing I love about the LG G2, especially back, I started using it, I think 2016. And funny enough, I started off this channel. The phone I was using when I was, building this channel up was the LG G2. And then I switched over to a Galaxy S4. But the G2 was the one that I used when I was building this channel up back in 2016. Now, what I will tell you though is that with this specific phone, the one thing I love about it is the design. The design of this phone is so timeless, and when you look at it, and you look at it like so many other phones in the marketplace, you can see that this phone does look pretty similar to those phones. And funny enough, and I wasn't going to bring it up, but I'm going to bring it up anyway, when you look at this phone and you look at a phone like the iPhone SE2, which one looks better? You know what I mean? I think this one looks better than the new iPhone SE that just came out, but it is what it is. I own both, so I think I have the right to say that. Now, looking on the front, you have a 5.2-inch true HD IPS panel. I don't know why they come up with those names, but it was a 1080p panel. And dude, I'll be honest, that screen really was pretty good. Even at this time, when I still look at it, I'm like, it's a pretty good panel. It's not a bad panel at all. It has 424 pixels per inch, which is even higher than the iPhone 11 screen. So this screen is a higher resolution than that panel on the iPhone 11, which is still really impressive. And I think the screen on this thing is one of the biggest assets for it for sure. You have a little bit of bezel on the top and bottom, but even now when I look at all the other phones and when I read a lot of forums on, on subreddits and stuff like that, a lot of people still bring this phone up, including me, mostly because I use it, but others because of this design. So the design was one of the biggest selling points of this phone for sure. On the bottom, you had a micro USB port and you had a headphone jack on this phone as too, but this thing came out in 2013. So it's totally okay. And on the back, you had those buttons, which was really cool. Now, for my specific model, I had the Verizon model that had that Verizon logo up top in the top right corner, which was the dumbest thing ever. I hated that so much, but this was an unlocked version at the time, and I think I had T-Mobile, so I was whatever, and it was the cheapest one I could find. But so many other models, and another thing I want to hit on, and I'll probably hit on in the software version, so I'm not going to hit on it now, but the Verizon model is one of the most locked versions of this phone, so there's really no way to modify it, and that there are ways to modify it, but the community behind the Verizon one specifically is not as high as other phone models in my opinion. So there's no memory card, there's no removable battery on this specific unit, but I do think other units had some sort of capability like that. But at the end of the day, on the outside, definitely for sure, the design is the one thing that's held up the most. And when I feel it in my hands, like I've stated before, it doesn't feel like an extremely cheap phone, and it's pretty durable for the most part. I used this thing for a year and a half, almost 2 years, I think. And then I switched over to the iPhone, and then I kept this phone still as a side phone, and I made all those videos on it, and it still looks pretty good. It's been in my drawers, I threw it around everywhere. It's been in a ton of videos, and it still works. This is the exact same one that I used. It's not like I sold it and then bought another one. This is the same exact LG G2, and it's still kicking to this day, which is really cool. So in terms of the outside and the design, that really pretty much covers it up for the most part. It still gets thumbs up in my books. Now, moving on to the software aspect, this is the thing where it's so confusing to me. Now, stock software, it's completely outdated. This thing started off with Android 4.2.2, where we are able to get Android March or Lollipop on it, which is really cool, so 5.0.2. But other than that, it's pretty outdated. And I will say, for me using this phone, LG's UI was so weird. I didn't have a good time using it at all. And I'm so glad I eventually did switch over to a custom ROM, so I was able to root this thing, and I was able to install Twerp on it and go from there. And at that time, I think in 2016, there were a lot of, there weren't a lot, but there were, some custom ROMs coming out for Android Marshmallow and Android Lollipop that were really cool. So I started flashing them. I bricked my phone 50 times, and then I found a really good one called Euphoria. And then I kept that one on for a long time until I switched out of it. But the problem is that with the Verizon one, there's really not too many options. I think still there's still some, versions that are coming out that are still, built for the specific model. But the specific phones that got the most amount of versions, the most amount of support were like the Sprint and T-Mobile ones. Those ones got so much support. And even now, when the new versions of software come out from custom ROM manufacturers, including Lineage OS and all these other people, for some reason, the LG G2 always makes it on that list, which is so cool. And I think the Verizon one comes on the list too, but I don't really remember. But I think that's so cool. Like the G3 comes on it too, maybe the G4. But with the LG G2, that still shows that there's a huge development community behind the phone in general. Maybe not specific versions of the phone, but the G2, is still pretty relevant, and I looked back at the Lineage OS 17.1 update in the device, the official supported devices, and the LG G2 was there, which is extremely, extremely cool. And I have a lot of respect for Lineage doing that. And I have a lot of respect for LG for just, putting this phone out there in the market to begin with. So for sure, in terms of stock support, completely outdated. This thing hasn't seen updates in stock software for a very long time, but you still have that custom ROM capability, which is extremely cool. And I really do like that. So for sure, even if all else fails, even if you don't like Android Lollipop anymore, you can still install Android 10 on it, which is really awesome. So in terms of software, that pretty much covers it. Now hitting on the performance. Now this is the one area where it's really weird because at the time I had an Android Lollipop ROM on it and I still have an Android Lollipop ROM on it. So performance, is still going to be about the same from at that time, but it has the Qualcomm Snapdragon 800 chipset, quad-core CPU, and Adreno 330 GPU, and 2 gigs of RAM. And at the time when I was using it, it didn't really feel like, a slow phone at all. And I would always go to like Best Buy and all these other stores and compare it to the newest phones at the time. And I think I, was comparing it to like a Galaxy S7 and like the Pixel 1 and stuff like that. And all those times I would look at my phone and be like, dude, this phone is still an extremely fast phone. Really, anything I threw at it, it was perfectly fine. And I say that all the time, but truly when I was using this phone day by day, it felt like a perfectly good phone, perfectly fast and everything. But looking at it now, like obviously it's pretty slow when we have phones like the Galaxy S20 and all these other phones, the iPhone 11 Pro. These phones are extremely fast, but the LG G2 at that time was still pretty decent. And even now, like, yeah, it's not the fastest thing in the world, but it's something of the mixture of like the design, the nav bar buttons, and just like the usability of it overall with the custom ROM. I had a pretty good experience with it overall. Now, obviously now it's not that fast. I probably want to recommend even your grandma using this phone, but for sure at the end of the day, I think the performance is very, very, very average in today's use. But considering the price and the age of this phone and just, what it is, I think you can get some pretty decent use out of it, especially if you custom ROM it and if you install Lineage OS on it. I mean, it's a really pretty decent pickup then at that point. But even then, like, there's a lot of other reasons why I probably would not recommend you to pick up this phone. So in terms of performance, I give it a very average score, but it still surprises me a little bit if I'm being honest. Now moving on to the camera, this thing has a 13 megapixel camera on the back. You can do 1080p at 60 frames. It's a single sensor, so no ultra-wide telephoto or anything. Again, this phone came out in 2013, and the camera on this thing was extremely good, and I had a really good time using it. Now this was the weirdest thing. For some reason, you were able to go and install some type of camera hack that allowed you to get, I think, the LG G3's camera on this one, and you were able to shoot 4K videos on this thing at some point. And I had that capability. I don't really remember the name of it, but I had that capability at one point, and it was extremely cool, and I had a really good time doing it. Obviously, like, it wasn't like the best. I think it was not even 30 frames or was super glitchy or something, I don't remember. But I had a good time with it, and the quality of the photos were extremely good. And the G2, I think, is one of those cameras that even when you look back at this day, like, it's still an extremely accessible camera. And I think a lot of people used it, and a lot of people owned it, and a lot of people have a lot of good reviews for the LG G2 camera. And for sure, at the end of the day, I think the G2 had a pretty good camera. Even now, when you use it, it's definitely not, a bad camera at all. So for sure, I give it a thumbs up in my books for the camera. It has a 2.1 megapixel 1080p camera at the front. And like I said, that's probably the worst part about the camera, to be honest, that front camera. But it is what it is, but the camera gets a thumbs up in my books, like I said. Now, ending it off with the battery life, this thing had a 3000 mAh battery inside of it. Now, it's probably not at that 3000 mAh anymore. It's probably at like 2000, probably even less than that, especially me. I mean, this phone's been dead for so long. But I can tell you, though, is that, in terms of the way that when I was using it at that time, the battery life was pretty good. I was ending the day with like 20-30%, which was good for me at that time because I knew this battery life wasn't going to last me all day. And I was coming from like a Samsung, what was that? I was coming from an Nexus 4, and that battery life wasn't even that good. But this battery life was pretty decent overall. So for sure, at the end of the day, the LG G2 had a pretty good battery life at the end of it. So in terms of that and in terms of outside, you might think this is still a pretty good pickup in 2020. However, like I stated in the beginning of this video, there were so many problems that happened with this phone that I didn't experience until after that. I just cannot recommend anybody to buy this phone anymore, even though I loved it and I personally had a really good time with it. It's just not a good, reason to pick this up. This thing had those boot looping issues. Sometimes if you were to boot up your phone or randomly, you would just get stuck at the LG logo and it would just keep booting up back and forth, and you would not be able to get past that boot up icon, which sucked really bad. All your information on your phone was deleted pretty much, so you were pretty much screwed. On top of that, there was that touchscreen issue where the digitizer would randomly stop working or portions of the screen would stop working. That's what happened to mine. Certain areas of my LG G2 screen does not work, and it sucks because I can't even install custom ROMs in it anymore, because when I go into Twerp, the area where I need to swipe to install, I'm not able to install it because I can't swipe it because the screen doesn't work there. So it does kind of suck a little bit. Is it the end of the world? Not really, but it is something to consider at the end of the day. So for sure, when it comes down to it, I'll probably tell you the LG G2 is a good phone still, I think, especially when you consider the Lineage OS support and everything, but I probably wouldn't recommend anybody to buy it just because of that, boot looping issues and the hardware issues that came with it. So I love this phone. I will always keep one and I have so much respect for it, but I don't really think anybody should, be experiencing these problems that a lot of other people have experienced when using this phone. So in terms of that pretty much covers it. If you guys have any other questions or anything, leave it down in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that means so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. Every single subscriber that we get really does count, so it means so much if you guys get that. Also check out the other links down in the description as well. My Twitter, my Instagram, my second channel. All those links are linked down below. I'd really appreciate if you guys would check it out. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.